on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Welcome to day 87 of the 365-day graphic novel review challenge. Today, I want to talk to you about The Death of Superman. This is a story that is very fondly remembered today by some people, but I don't think that it's necessarily because of the story itself. I think it's because of circumstances surrounding the story. This is probably the biggest time in history where something happened in comics and everyone made a huge mountain out of a molehill. That's not the first time that this happened, but it's definitely the biggest time. I remember when Jason Todd died, I heard that Denny O'Neil went to a restaurant somewhere and an employee saw that he had a Batman pin on his lapel of his jacket, and they said, "Oh, what's that for?" And he said that he edited Batman comics, and they're like, "Hey, look, this is the guy who killed Robin." So this is not the first time that that happened, but it's definitely the biggest time that it happened. I don't even think in recent years, like when Captain America was revealed to be an agent of Hydra, that was a thing that news reported on, or about 10 years ago when Captain America died, news reported on that also, but neither one of those really felt like a big deal compared to this. From what I have heard, and of course I was just a little kid when this happened, so I wasn't paying attention to the news or anything like that, but from what I've heard, the news seized on this and they absolutely blew it up into a much bigger deal than it actually was. Basically, anyone who is reading comics knew that every now and then comic book characters die and then they come back to life. They weren't really fooled by, oh, Superman died, yeah, right, pull the other leg. But the news outlets, they were just blowing up everything talking about this. Newspapers, news shows, everything was making a huge deal about this 50-year-old comic book character now being killed off. And so people who didn't usually read comic books were now rushing to their local comic book shops to try and buy the issue because they figured that it was going to be worth something because this is the issue where Superman dies. And so DC Comics, they weren't idiots. They were going to try and make a little bit of money off of everyone else making this big deal out of this. So then they did second, third, and fourth reprints of the issue, and then they sold these little black armbands commemorating the life of Superman. It was a really huge deal. And on top of all of that, this was the first part in a trilogy, and in my opinion, this is the weakest part of the trilogy. The other two books that are part of this whole big storyline, they are quite a bit better than this one. And I guess that's as good of a place as any for me to talk about what actually happens here. Basically, this underground monster with bone protrusions coming out of its skin, it comes to the surface and it wants to destroy everything, and then Superman and this monster, calling itself Doomsday, or rather the people call it Doomsday, they get in a big fight and then they both die. And that's the plot of this story. There is no plot of this story. It's just one big 6-issue fight scene. That's why I don't really like this book. I don't think that it's very good, and if you take away the media frenzy that happened around this, and you take away the other two parts of this trilogy that are superior to this, and if you just showed this to somebody, they would say, okay, this isn't very good. It's not very good. That's really all that I have to say about it. I think that it will be much easier for me to talk about Funeral for a Friend and The Reign of the Superman because there's actually stuff that happens in those stories. Whereas here, this is basically just the launch pad for those other events to happen and for more interesting things to happen. And I did talk about, whenever I talked about the Crisis of the Crimson Kryptonite story, how the whole reason that this event actually exists is because back whenever the people who were doing the comics decided that they were going to get Lois and Clark hitched, the people who were doing the Lois and Clark TV series, they found out about it somehow, and they called up the comic book people and they said, hey, you can't do that. We want the characters in the comics to get married at the same time that the characters get married in the TV show, which is weird because Lois and Clark hadn't even started yet, and they weren't going to get married until season 4. So that was a little weird, especially for the TV people to be demanding that of the comic people. But anyway, they did, and the comic book people, they said, okay, we'll listen to what you say. And so they had to try and figure out a way to delay the wedding, even though Clark had already proposed to Lois. And so Jerry Ordway, famously, at the Superman summits, he would always say, let's just kill him. And everyone would laugh and say, okay, Jerry, that's pretty funny. Well, then, after the Lois and Clark people told them that they could not let Lois and Clark get married in the comics, then Jerry Ordway said, let's just kill him. And this time they said, yeah, let's do it. And then they came up with the Death of Superman trilogy. And I think part of the reason that this whole entire saga stretches out longer than it really needs to, let's be honest, if you combine this with the Funeral for a Friend thing and then the Reign of the Superman, it all goes on just a little bit too long. I think part of the reason that it all stretches out so long is because they were trying to kill some time. They didn't want to kill Superman and bring him back in like 3 months, because then they were going to have to find some other way to delay the wedding. So they really wanted to stretch this out as long as they possibly could. That's why this part of the trilogy is 6 issues long. It could have been 2 issues long, but they wanted to really stretch it out just to try and kill as much time as they possibly could until they could finally get Lois and Clark married. So that's part of the reason why this story isn't very good. I think that if you collected this with Funeral for a Friend and you cut out a lot of the unnecessary stuff, then I think that it would read better as a story, but as is, it does not read very good by itself. So if you are looking to get into Superman stuff, maybe you watched a documentary that talked about the death of Superman as this big huge thing that the media just blew up on, do not read this story by itself. I'm not even sure if I would recommend that you read this story. I think that if you want to read anything from the mid-90s, just go ahead and read The Return of the Superman or Reign of the Superman. I think if you read that, you don't really need the previous 2 stories to really understand what's going on. But if you absolutely have to read this, read it and then go read the Funeral for a Friend stuff like right afterwards, because that's really where all the plot stuff starts. There's not much plot here, and if you keep that in mind going into this, I think you'll at least not have as bad of a reading experience as you potentially could have. So that's about all that I have to say today. I hope that you guys liked this video. If you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back tomorrow with another video. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.